what we have promised you today is a wrap-up of the theme of the month with wine and chat. This is our sofa, incidentally, with the World Anvil logo behind. We're just in our living room, so we thought we'd show you like the relaxed side of World Anvil HQ.
Relaxed side.
Again, if you have any questions, do let us know. But we are going to crack straight on with some questions that we got from week 1. Now, this was the week that we were talking to Guy. And these are all questions that we didn't get to answer beforehand. So we're answering them now. We did promise we would try. If you have questions that you asked and you don't hear them being answered, pop them in the chat again. And again, we will try and get around to them. So there's a really interesting question here. First of all, about essentially racism and dislike between species and between peoples. Now, racism is something that we have to handle very carefully, of course, and be very sensitive about, but this is all fictional racism that we're talking about here. So, if in a fantasy or sci-fi setting, humans are racist towards another species, people are racist sometimes, white people racist against black people, and black people racist to elves? Like, so would it be like that? Or would all the people unite and be racist together? In a happy racist harmony?
It is in fact a very interesting question, because it is not really about racism.
No.
It is about the way that people create communities and what feels familiar. And I think that just saying that, will the elves be racist to the humans or the other way around is a very generic way of thinking of things. We have to start a bit backwards before you go to the are they racist or do they have any enmity between them. You should ask themselves how each race perceives the other in terms of not only social structure but also in terms of how they understand the importance or the place of that race into that world.
Yeah.
And by say race, because that is what the D&D norm is. I mean,
I was going to say, if I can just cut in there, there's two different things going on. There is racism, which is where different phenotypes are biased the one against the other. So you have red hair, so I don't like you, or you have pink skin, so I don't like you, or whatever. That's racism, all within the same species. And then there is, this is a Terry Pratchett word, speciesm, which is different kinds of sapient species being biased against each other.
So I'll take it on a completely different matter, and I will say that regardless of race, species, or anything like that, you have to understand that people, at least humans as we know them, and the animals of the animal kingdom as we know them, tend to gravitate towards creating communities. And communities are created by people who have a common sense of purpose, but also they feel comfortable with each other. That means that in a fantasy city, for example, people will feel comfortable and they will create communities and they will create connections between each other, regardless of the species or anything like that, depending on how what people believe for each other and what connects them and binds them together. For example, if you had a city like one of those mega cities we see in fantasy, like the great cities like, I don't know,
Coruscant. Not Coruscant, sorry, Carillion, the magic university place in Forgotten Realms. Help me out here. Cormyr,
yeah. So most of the times you see them separated into different like quarters or districts, however they call them every time. There is a chance that you can say that, for example, all the traders of the city have something in common, or the scientists of the city have something in common, for example. And if that common, whatever this is stronger than what separates them, which is their race or species or like color, skin of the color, they will create a community which is going to be stronger and they won't have racism internally.
Absolutely.
And that you see also in the modernized world, as for example in bigger cities, in people that are affluent tend to be less racist towards each other, kind of thing, because the thing that connects them are stronger than the things that they don't.
Absolutely. I think there's another aspect here as well, which is actually two aspects which are sort of interlinked. The one is it depends very much not on a species as a whole, but the culture within the species that you're talking
Indeed.
about. Because not all species, like not all humans are going to react the same way.
Not even
And
close.
not all groups of humans are going to react the same way. And that brings me to my second point, sorry, which is that if, for example, quokkas, I don't know if you know quokkas, they are adorable. They are native to Tasmania, I think. And they are fluffy and cute, and they're just super friendly. They're super friendly with all other animals because they have no natural predators. I think this speaks a lot to how the history of a species affects how a species interacts with others. If a species has not been threatened, they won't necessarily be threatening towards others or afraid of others.
To be fair, they had the same problem with so many island species in the Polynesian, essentially archipelago,
Yeah.
when you saw humans coming there and picking up dodos because dodos didn't know how to react or
Exactly.
why to run away because they were never
Hunted.
hunted and they
Yeah.
never had any natural predators, so they were just like,
But I think
that thing
that's,
just picked me up.
that's a
And-
paradigm that
Yeah.
carries through to sapient species as well.
Yeah. So I guess that as with our society, speciesm, as you call it, will be something that will be a correlation of the history, the culture, and the understanding that they have to each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the question is effectively is think of your world and think how well people know each other. And if they don't know well each other, if love is who you know.
yeah,
As simple as that. If a species is far away from each other and they're keeping to themselves, when this species goes into a city, everybody will see them with a with a raised eyebrow because they don't know about them and they naturally have to defend themselves. And the first reaction will always be to be conscious, if not aggressive, to them, essentially.
yeah. So there's a certain amount of distrust is bred from from lack of
Exactly.
information, essentially.
Exactly. But you see
Yeah.
that everywhere. I mean,
Yeah, totally. We should probably move on right now. There's a really interesting question here. How would you work social dynamics with regards to sailing around on boats within a seafaring campaign? Different races having different norms while sailing around and such.
it is very true. And if you want a good example from the real world, think of the Indian Ocean and the first ships that came from Holland and England and all the other big, like Spain as well and Portugal essentially, and how they were treated and how different it was and how the cultures of Europe, which were quite unique by themselves, clashed and morphed and changed on themselves, but also changed the culture there.
Yeah.
If we're talking about specifically about ships, I don't know if you know it, that there was a specific caste of Indians that they were sailors on ships of the trading companies from abroad.
Huh.
And they were introduced into the ships and they had their completely own hierarchy. So, for example, let's say that you are a British ship and you have your own sergeants and your own crew, which is enlisted officers, and then you have all the crewmen.
Yeah.
And that was essentially the hierarchy. Like you have the captain, and then you have essentially the navigator, and everybody else around them, and then you have the crewmen.
Yeah.
Then they would have a person from India who would be leading all the other people from India, and all of them would be underneath the crewmen.
Sure.
And it was very interesting because as the years progressed and as they became more important because A, they knew the waters,
Yeah.
and B, there was not so many crewmen willing to go from Europe to India.
Sure.
They were able to push for the rise to become higher and more important, and there was a really important battle of how these people were integrated and how far up they could go.
Interesting. Yeah.
Even in the West India Company or East India Company kind of thing, it was very, very interesting as an idea. And I think that by the end of the whole colonial era, there were instances of people from India and from the Polynesia that they almost had the rank of officers, but without really being officers. They were like higher than crewmen, but not officers of the British Navy or anything, whatever this might have been.
Sure. I think that's super interesting, by the way. I'm really curious about the background of how you know that, but it's super interesting. I should mention at this point, actually, two things. The first is Ethnis raided us because Ethnis is awesome. Thank you so much, Ethnis. That was really cool.
Hey, Baron.
How are you doing, guys? And the second thing is that Dimitri, as well as being coder extraordinaire and UX designer extraordinaire and designer extraordinaire, also has a master's in social psychology. So I am actually talking to somebody very qualified to talk about social dynamics in general. This won't be true of all the topics, but it just happens that Dimitri has a specialism in this.
On
so
that, yeah.
he has an awful lot of interesting information to impart on this. In terms of these kinds of dynamics, if you're looking for conflict points in this, it's worth... So if you have a setup like this, that you're world building and you're looking for sort of conflicts and similarities, it's worth considering the ideologies of the people who have been thrown together in this situation, because that's very much how this goes. And seeing where the friction points would be. So where ideals and taboos meet, and where customs and taboos meet. And that's where you're going to find conflict points. That's where you're going to find interest in your social dynamics there.
To be fair, I think that we kind of don't... I mean, we kind of gloss over it when it comes to fantasy, but in truth, if you think of the differentiation between humans that come from the same physiology, because we are all humans, we have the same brain, we have exactly the same biological needs, which is very important, and we came from the same ancestors.
Yeah.
Okay? So think how different would it be if you're coming from elves, which come from a completely divergent part, if there is essentially a divergent part and they really evolved from something. Their physiology, their biological needs, their genetic makeup, and their understanding of the world around them will create completely different understanding of the world. Totally. So I believe, and that is just a thought, that in reality, when you're talking about fantasy settings, you are most of the time talking about a time that the species had a lot of time to merge together, like a good millennia.
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of like span you're looking at, like because you think about it. And that is a bit of a touchy point, but Africans and Europeans and the white man, you're going to say it like
Caucasians,
that.
Yes.
The Caucasians were diverged for a very long time due to the Mediterranean, effectively.
And the Ice Age and the...
I'm talking about more modern times, essentially. Sure. But when we first met again, we got slavery to... Slavery was always a... First of all, slavery, as we know it, was always a thing, even in Africa. And way before it became a thing...
everywhere.
Yes, of course, in Europe as well. I mean, that it was never a question. But think about the connection of slavery between the black African tribes and the...
And Europe,
And Europe, exactly. So imagine it took us about 200 years to start seeing integration. If we think like that. So if there were different species, how long would you need?
Yeah.
Like, how long will it take for these differences to be bridged and for things to be reconciliated? I really believe that if you're going to have any kind of, oh yeah, he's an elf kind of thing, oh yeah, he's a dwarf and he's the blacksmith, or he's the Fletcher because he's an elf kind of thing, we're talking about 500 to 600 years of actual integration and struggle and literally I'm stuck.
Distrust? That kind of thing?
Well, possibly distrust, possibly awe. I mean, think about that. The elves, if they are immortal, they're
quite ubermenschy. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Also, there might be a lot of envy, for example. So there are a lot of things that you have to consider. And the idea, I mean, we kind of touch when it comes to fantasy with the vampires and witches, like they live forever, so they shouldn't have ties with the normal world because what they love, they will die. I mean, you wrote a song about it as well. So imagine just that. Like, let's leave everything else on the side. Think about the fact how different will be the connections with somebody who lives for 800 years.
Yeah.
That he probably knew not your grandfather, but your grandfather's grandfather, and they were playing dice together.
Yeah.
And he knows you. How different is that? How much knowledge this person will impart? No matter how slow they learn, and no matter how slow they evolve emotionally, they will still have a wealth of knowledge just because of friction with everyday life that is above and beyond anything you will ever have.
Yeah, it's a completely different... It would cause a completely different philosophy, a completely different way of looking at the world.
Exactly.
Absolutely. We have a question here. Why does no one make goblin females? I never see goblin females. I made a goblin female.
It's a...
Yes, so I made a goblin female. I gave Dimitri a quest to go fight some goblins. And then I made baby goblins. that
I
he
killed the
killed
parents.
one of the he killed the parents, and then he discovered that they were babies, except he'd set their lair on fire and they were all going to die. And then one of them did die, and then the other one survived, and then it became his ward. So he had a female goblin ward called Etze.
And I still
Or
remember it.
Etze.
I still remember Etze after like so many years. I don't think that people don't make females. I think that, and that's a generic issue, people treat the critters of the common critters like goblins, orcs, ogres, kobolds, whatever, as just things to kill
Mooks,
and warriors. But they don't understand that a goblin that lives in a village will probably have some sort of relationship, some sort of a family, even if that's essentially a harem of females. That one, like the what we were watching the other day, the male elephant seals that were controlling the. I mean, it might have been like that the goblins necessarily have a system like that. Like the prime male has a
harem of 50
a harem
females,
of 50 females actually, and the other
or
males.
the other way around.
Yeah, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But I think that for me, this is what makes games really interesting, and that's why I love Etze.
Yeah.
Because you turn to its side the idea of like, oh yeah, that's a goblin. It's not just a goblin.
Yeah, it's got children. It has, and again, the goblin ward became like his daughter in a way.
Yeah.
He had to teach it to have a pet rabbit, and the pet rabbit was friend, not food, and like she had to make these transitions, and it was hard.
Yeah. And that is what the beautiful thing. I mean, that's where storytellers. I want to talk about storytelling a little bit more. That's where you can can do a lot of difference. Don't treat your critters, not always, but most of the times, don't treat your critters as just people that need to die or they attack you.
They're not cardboard figures, yeah.
Exactly. They have a reason they attack you. And the reason can be either for survival, it can be for food, it can be because they're going to get your money because they are thieves, but they do have some...
They might be opportunists, they might be defending their home, or they might be sent to attack you.
They exist within one social hierarchy, to go back into
Absolutely,
our subject.
Yeah.
And that is what makes it interesting.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, completely. This is a great one. So basically, how might high magic affect social dynamics? This was a pseudo-cube question. So how might high magic affect social dynamics in everyday life?
Social dynamics. Well, I would say one thing. How does money affect social dynamics? Because magic is the ability to morph the world around you to your will by using the power that nobody else has.
Yeah.
So, how does magic affect things? It's an interesting question because science fiction, in fact, really often talks about it, like as a subject. Like it's a very because like altered carbon, for example, lately we've seen. I have seen, in fact, it was very interesting because it made the dichotomy. It is a post-human kind of system, as you know, and it made the dichotomy between people who can live forever because they have the money, and they can die as many times they want, and they just like discard their bodies, which are just suits, literally.
Yeah.
And they live forever because they have the ability. Because they can live forever, they can have immense wealth that only gets bigger and things like that. The same thing with money. How much can it affect the way that you see the world around you? I can put it that way. Leave magic aside. Let's talk about medieval society. How important was how much money you had and how many weapons you had and what kind of armor you had? Like, imagine that knights, which were the lowest of nobility, and it was also something that you only had for a lifetime, unless your kids for some reason inherited it, how much of a difference you had from everybody else, which were essentially serfs. And they belonged to the land.
Well, I mean, there were differences between knights and serfs. Like, there were other echelons, but yes.
Yeah, but still, I mean... well, they come later on. I'm talking about the time of towns and cities and middle class. I'm talking about the time that we had essentially the powerful noble and everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's the difference you're going to say. I think that everybody who can use magic, depending on how openly accessible it is to the world and how expensive it is, that's the question there. How is the wealth distributed? But don't think about money.
Yeah.
Think about magic and the way it can be distributed. Can everybody have magic?
Yeah.
If not everybody can have magic, and only a very small amount of magic and people can have magic, these people could either be very powerful or very enslaved by the and controlled by the nation.
Yeah.
If magic is very widespread, then the question is how strong you are, and does it cost money for you to learn magic? Because if it does cost you money to go to learn magic, like going to Oxford or Cambridge, for example, then it's going to be a privilege.
Yeah.
Like you
And
might
it's
have
gonna be
magic
only
everywhere.
for the wealthy, for example.
Exactly, going to be only for the wealthy. Unless you are, for example, a sorcerer, which is kind of like a wild talent, like Mozart, for example, that you got up because you really had it in you, kind of thing.
Let's be clear, Mozart was educated from the age of 2
Yeah.
to be musical. Like, yes, of course, he was a sorcerer of music. He was an innate talent, but he was educated from the start.
It was just an example of talented
Of course.
individual.
No, absolutely. But yeah, I think there's some very interesting questions there in terms of have and have not that you've raised about how magic gives you power, and some very interesting questions about how magic can be very much seized by the state as well. And I think that could have a massive impact on...
It could. And I find it very odd, like the taxation or the lack of taxation when it comes to RPG campaigns about magical items and like very powerful things.
Yeah.
The same thing is going to be with wizardry and magic. Like it's a very powerful property.
Yeah.
Not to have it under control, or at least to legalize it or find ways to control it one way or another.
Absolutely, to have it as some kind of controlled substance, tax substance, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We got a very interesting question from True Undead Hero. From a socialist perspective, who most often are seen as people who rise to power and starters of empires?
That's a very interesting question, and it really depends. It's interesting because I wanted to write a whole series of videos about it, if you remember.
I do, yeah. We suffer very much from lack of time here at Anvil HQ, with lots and lots of ideas, and really it's just about getting the time to make them happen.
That is one that I would really love to do in the future at some point. But the answer is that, one of the answers is that power comes from the individual. And although we don't see it in everyday life, so much anymore because we are so many and the structures that build the community around us are very well structured. When it comes to the beginning, to the rise of power, as we said, for example, for a tribe or for the village, let's say the Viking village that will become a massive empire or a massive nation or will go to take over a good part of England, it starts from one individual that was probably either very charismatic or very powerful in terms of money, or very powerful because of his mere strength, and had people follow him. So you can say that in many ways, for one reason or another, in order to have a rise to power, you need a single individual that will be able to amass around him enough people with enough knowledge and enough power to be able to, for them and for their clan or for their, however you want to call it, whatever it is going to to be important enough for people to essentially kneel the knee. How do you call that? Kneel on their knees, kind of thing.
Oh yeah, fall to their knees. Yeah,
fall to their knees, exactly. So, and that's how it starts. It starts more or less as how do you call it when people the mafia was going to people to ask for money in order to protect them from themselves.
Protection rackets.
Yeah, it is a protection racket. Because somebody who's going to be powerful and he wants to rise in power, you will go to the farm and will say, look, my bud, I can protect you from myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they won't tell you like that, but they will tell you there are people who want to harm you.
Yeah.
I will take care of you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Pay me money, or give me your first son, or give me your daughters, or give me part of your food, because everything like that will be the cornerstones of building up a stronger and more powerful center of power.
Yeah.
Either if it's food, or if it's money, or if it's manpower, all of them is required to effectively go to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can think of one other answer to that question, which is that looking through history, particularly through the ancient world, there are an awful lot of people who have risen to power and are the sons of clerks. I don't know why, but Nebuchadnezzar is one example, and Ramesses II is another example.
It is a good reason. There's a very good reason for that.
Oh, yeah.
So, this is something that you can read about if you want to, if you read content in terms of the Bronze Age collapse. it is something which we don't discuss a lot because we're not sure about it. And
Right.
I'm not the specialist on that, just to be clear. I have read, but I'm definitely not somebody who you'll be taking as an authority on that subject. But what in general it is said is that the point that you reach, that you have clerks, it is the point that your infrastructure is so big that requires people to start counting how much money you're making.
Yeah.
So think about that.
Bookkeeping. It needs bookkeeping.
Exactly. So if you're a ruler and you have 10,000 people around you tilling the land, and you need to know how much money or how much grain or how much anything they owe you, there is no way you can know it by your heart. Yeah. Maybe you have 20, you can remember that John owes you, for example, 2 acres and Tilly owes you
of course,
5
but at some
chickens. But at some point, you reach the point and say, okay, I don't remember anymore. At this point, you need a scribe.
Yeah.
The moment, and that doesn't happen at one point. It happens essentially in a much bigger scale. Yeah. So the existence of clerks means that you have a society evolved enough to need to count resources and need to be able to keep, as you said, bookkeeping essentially from time to time, to year, to understand how well they're doing or how bad they're doing, or if they should be taking more. And that's why power comes from, because that is like the fertile river for rise to power, because you have a structure that has everything that it needs, that just needs an individual smart enough to know how to take advantage, thank you, to take advantage of the situation and essentially do something great.
Yeah. All right, guys. Clark's Sons. You heard it here. We have a great question from 1x20, who you guys might know that we are sponsoring. You should go check them out. They are awesome. Why do you think there are so many murder hobos in fantasy games like Dungeons & Dragons? Do you think it's the darker side of human nature, influence of other fantasy games that are hack and slash, or just people like to be chaotic? As a chaotic member myself. I think that, I'm sorry, I just sort of jumped on this one. I think that murder hobo isn't necessarily chaotic, personally. I think that chaos is something slightly different. I think chaos is not selfishness. I think that's evil, if you see what I mean. So the murder hobo, where literally you just run around and kill people and take their stuff, that's evil rather than good, not chaotic rather than lawful. Because the chaotic lawful thing is how much do you adhere to a code of honor or your own code of honor or whatever, or how much do you just do stuff.
Let's not go into alignment because
no, of course.
But you're absolutely right. I think, and now I'm gonna shrink away my way through this, but you see, the reason that people play RPGs varies. And if you have a lot of murder hobos, probably you have a lot of people that either want to have fun and just chill and just kill stuff because it's fun and because it makes them happy and because it is an instant gratification. So going into a dungeon and clearing it, it's a very instant gratification, right? You go there, you kill stuff, you get XP, you got a level. It's a great thing. You feel
validated.
Exactly. Yeah. Playing something like Vampire the Masquerade, which everything is about the long and probably the long
and often
game.
All the choices are wrong.
Yes. It is a different feeling. It's about essentially exercising your brain, and it takes time, and it takes commitment, it takes strength. I mean, we see it with our games, because our games tend to be more like brain requiring. Yeah,
they're more cerebral, more psychological, and more emotionally draining as well.
Exactly, and that's why sometimes you feel like I cannot play today because I'm not chilled enough to play, right?
Yeah.
If you were just going there to kill stuff, you'll be okay, let's go play kind of thing.
I do like killing stuff.
Yes, and that is the reason, I think, as simple as that. It has to do with what people need, and you have people that need the instant gratification of killing something and having fun, and some others that want to essentially take into their skin another character and personify them and explore it, essentially.
Yeah, I think there's two other aspects as well that are interesting to consider. The first is computer games, because a lot of computer games are just murder hobo. Like, you can run around Skyrim and just kill people and take their stuff. That's, like, you can do that. It works. And a lot of games focus very much on the killing people and taking their stuff rather than the story. Or if there is story, a lot of people don't play it for the story, if you see what I mean. The other thing is that a lot of people, particularly when they first go into the game, they're told you can do anything. So what do? They kill people and take their stuff. Because A, the paradigm is there from computer games, and B, they're testing the limits They want to see if they really can do anything, and then they find out that they can, because that's
that is not true though, because I think that's why we have so many murder hobos. Because we have a lot of storytellers that allow us to have murder hobos.
Yeah.
If the storyteller will tell you, you know what, okay, go kill them, people. It's fine.
Yeah.
And then the next
These
day,
are the consequences.
Exactly. And then you essentially end up having the whole family of the person you killed hunting you down, and the law being really at your ass.
Yeah, and seeing their orphans starving in the street. And I mean, this is what I did to Dimitri. I gave him consequences for killing goblins.
Goblins, not even humans. Goblins.
I'm talking pesky goblins. He was told that there were wolves in the field. He went out and discovered there were pesky goblins. They were stealing sheep. What did I do? I gave him consequences. And those consequences made the game so much richer.
Yeah, exactly. From my perspective as a player, when I started, I was like the third son of a noble, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And I was trying to prove myself.
Yeah.
So I wanted to effectively help the villagers. So I went there to destroy the threat. Yeah. The threat was goblins. I killed the goblins. What I realized was that the goblins had children. And yeah, that's a different story. But essentially,
I'm a really mean DM.
Jeez.
So mean.
Jeez.
It's fun.
Oh yeah, it's
and
super
epic.
Fun, super fun.
But I'm super mean.
And that's the thing. If we had more storytellers like you,
we'd have fewer murder
hobos. Or a lot of people who are literally social, like they have social problems, as in they have like, how do you call that? Mental instabilities, because they can still kill understanding the consequences. That's a different thing.
Absolutely. We have a question here. Do you think that magic can nullify the need for technology? We are talking about social dynamics today. That is going to be a great question for when we talk about the porcelain argument, the interactions between magic and technology, and we'll be doing that later this year. So stay tuned for that and ask us that question then.
Yes.
How significant is the number of generations in this process? This is the process of how many years people live, how detached different races can be because of this longevity. 500 years might be a lot for some people, but for an elf says, I remember that.
Yes, it's very true. And again, I will go from something we know from our world. We know for a fact that in order to have any sort of tradition being built, you have to be able to live enough to have met your grandmother.
We know this from elephants.
Exactly. So it's as simple as that. So if you have a society that your lifespan is big enough for you to be able to survive, to meet your grandparents and to learn from your grandparents, and for your mother to be taught by your grandmother, you have a passing of knowledge from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
The pace of life and the amount of information you consume during your lifetime as well, and that is very, very important for us right now in the community, in the society we're in right now, because the information overload we get is unprecedented compared to anything else we had before.
Yeah. We
have to understand that society so far was much slower in the way that they were getting information.
Oh yeah, totally.
I have not studied the fact, but I know that for sociologists that did, and the things that they would say that there is proof that the amount of knowledge that somebody gets in a year right now is equivalent to something that the average population would take in a whole lifetime.
The whole pace of life used to be slower.
Yeah.
It's worth mentioning.
But also access to knowledge. Simple as that.
But for example, and this sounds like a funny example in some way, but so I'm trained in historical music. That's what my master's degree is in. And if you look at some of these songs from the medieval era, you look at them even from the Renaissance era, for example, the court of Elizabeth I, you see these songs have like 19 verses. Mm-hmm. 19 verses, people. These were really long songs. People would sit down and listen to these. Today...
And know them.
And know them and be familiar with them and listen all the way through. Today, if you perform them, you have to cut things. You can't perform 19 verses of a song. Nobody will sit there and listen to that because they don't have the concentration span anymore.
Sorry, you're absolutely right, and that's exactly how it works, because we do have more information to absorb as well. But what was the original question? Sorry, because I kind of got lost on that.
The original question was, why do you... from a social perspective, I'm confused. I'm lost. Sorry. How significant is the number of generations in this process?
Yes. So we talked about essentially grandparents, and... For the elves, will be the same, but another thing you should take into consideration is twofold. Mm. The more you live, the more information you learn, and depending on how your brain is built, and that might be a species related thing, you'll either become more consolidated to your opinions and more strict, or more open.
Yeah.
So the question is which of the two you are, because if you are an elf of type X, and as you grow you become more open to opinions and more open to ideas, then it might be the fact that in fact in a generation you can change your ideas. And you can see the world changing and you adapt to the idea that the world is changing so quickly around you, so you become much more receptive to it. If you're like a human, which we know that effectively after a point everything new starts to feel strange and starts to feel like away from what you actually know from a young age, that might be disastrous, because it might need necessarily 1,500 years to have a third generation pass in elves to make the slight shift.
Exactly. And as you were saying, if you know your grandparents, you can start seeing societies and with this tradition. But it might be that if you have 5 generations of grandparents, that locks you into a sort of crystalline traditional structure that you can't escape.
You cannot escape, exactly.
So again, we cannot know for sure.
And again, that goes back to genetics, like how many times they reproduce, how close they are to their family. Like, is it like a thing that they keep with their kids for the first 20 years of their lives and they are all alone?
How long is infancy? How long until sexual maturity? That is to say, how long until they hit puberty and get all the way through and all of this
stuff. So to go back to that, think about these questions first before you think about how society will be reacted. Think about the genetic makeup and the physiological makeup of your species.
Absolutely.
And that will give you a lot of the answers you need in terms of how they react and why they react the way they react.
And actually, I'm releasing next week a primer on world building social dynamics, which should have hopefully all the questions and all the bits and pieces you need to think about when you start with building a new culture, really from the beginning to the end. So you get some kind of picture of how it works, and you work it through, and it's unique and it makes sense. And one of the first questions I ask is, how does biology affect couples and marriage and the family? Mm-hmm. Because that's gonna change hugely the way that society functions.
Most certainly.
Most basic fundamental unit,
which comes
changes
even close
everything.
to that. It comes to the question of, is your species a species that is like a pack?
Yeah.
Is it a matter of individualism? Is it a species that the males live away from the females?
Yeah. Are they territorial?
Exactly.
Do they mate for life? Do they mate for a season? Are they oviparous? That is to say, do they lay eggs?
Exactly. So all of these things will change radically the way that people understand family as a unit.
And from that...
And structure us in general, exactly.
Yeah,
as well.
And from that's going to change. For example, how big are houses in cities? Well, if you're housing a massive extended family unit, they're going to be really big. If you have territorial species, when they come to start making family cities, they're going to have probably smaller houses that only take, for example, a mother and child, because the father is not traditionally part of that family unit.
Exactly.
Or the father and child, because the mother is not part of that family unit.
Yeah. Or you might have, for example, family houses which are kind of like communes for the women and the children.
Totally, yeah.
And men that live like bachelors all over the place. I mean, that it is the case as well.
There's all kinds of different ways. But exactly, this family unit is going to affect the physical aspects of how your society works.
Also,
and the conlangs and the religions and
the rulership as well. Like
absolutely.
We're talking about kingdoms, but every definition of kingdom we have is based on human physiology.
Yeah.
And human understanding of family and human understanding of smaller ties.
Yeah.
You might find out, for example, that in a family, in a more territorial species, even if it's a species that creates families, you might have something closer to the khanate.
Yeah.
Like families that live completely in isolation, far away from each other, and they only have like a moot, effectively, that they come together once every X.
Absolutely.
Kind of months.
And there might be a sort of a higher figure in that, and there might not. And there's so many ways of doing this.
Exactly.
And again, it's all based on how biology affects the family unit and how the family unit functions. We have so many questions here. Actually, we had a couple of questions.
You know, we've done that to, in fact, lower the amount of questions, right? Not to multiply
We
them.
tried to answer all your questions, but now we have more questions. But there's such interesting questions that we want to keep answering them. Kelvin asked me a whole bunch of questions, and I'm going to pick one right now. Are there any common celebrations that every culture has? Which ones and why are they so universal? Yes, there are. There are two bookends that everybody goes through. Birth and death. Everybody is born and everybody dies. Unless you have a super special species, in which case congratulations, maybe they ascend to a higher plane or something. But everybody's born and everybody dies. And there's, especially with death, because it's so unknown in our world, there's a lot of ceremony around it.
Mm-hmm.
And often that ceremony is not only for the person who died, it's for the people who are left behind.
In fact,
Psychologically,
is,
if not culturally. So they're two that exist pretty much everywhere. Coming of age ceremonies are also super common, and you see them in so many different societies and so many different religions in different forms.
Yeah, I mean, from bar mitzvah to...
Bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, confirmation within the Christian church.
Yes.
You see things like...
rites for the Spartans, for example, go to the wild, kill the boar kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Or pass the X test, or survive by yourself in a night, or...
A lot of African tribes go through endurance tests.
Yeah,
and actually,
exactly, yeah.
I think in South America that's quite common as well. That they'll go through various endurance tests. I think in Australia they have traditions about this as well.
I think even in the modern world we have them. We might not consider them anymore.
16th birthday, 18th birthday,
Yeah.
21st birthday. These are random numbers, but they have significance within certainly
And
Western
they change
culture.
as well, but they all signify the same thing. It's the coming of age, is the
Absolutely.
passing from one milestone in your life to the next one.
Definitely. And I think it's something interesting about modern culture that instead of one coming of age ceremony, we now have three.
Yeah.
16, 18, 21. Like, it's become more gradual somehow. But yes, those are some of the many. Getting married is another one. Your culture may not have marriage. They may
Or
not
being
have...
ready to be married. Like to be eligible.
Exactly. They may not have a formalization of marriage, but if you do have permanent partnerships, probably you will have some kind of celebration of that. And that's another one that is very common. The first birth of a child is another thing that might be a coming of age ceremony.
Yeah.
There's so many different kinds of things that, are common to many people within a culture and that therefore get celebrated.
Yeah.
And of course, within our culture, we celebrate birthdays as well. That's another sort of rite of passage that we go through every year. And another celebration that has a lot of cultural ties as well.
Indeed, yeah.
Alrighty then. Let's go back to some of our questions of the day. Ethnis asks, what was your favourite part of this new experiment and why was it war? So just to fill you guys in, as part of this new theme of the month, we have 4 weeks. So we go in a cycle of 4 weeks, and then every now and then there will be a fifth Sunday. And on that fifth Sunday, we'll do something extra fun. We might do a game stream. We might do a guest appearance of somebody else. Basically, I want the day off, so I'm going to get somebody else to do something. That's what's happening there. On the third week of every month, assuming that it all goes well and we continue with this format, we release the competition of the month. That's the community competition. And that is released in a special live stream that happens at 9 o'clock on a Saturday. That's 9 o'clock GMT, which is called War World Anvil Radio. And that is run by Baron of Ethnis. Ethnis is one of the really awesome worlds on World Anvil. And in fact, it just won the best world of 2018, according to our community.
Indeed.
So, Craig, congratulations, Ethnis. Nice job. And I think Baron wanted a subtle plug to that. But actually...
Subtle plug.
Subtle. That
like
was
a
a
Nell van
Titanic-sized plug.
Yeah.
But actually, my favourite part of War so far, here I go. My favourite part of the topic of the month so far has been speaking to all the super interesting people, because I've got to speak to really cool people this month. It's totally just an excuse for me to talk to cool people, you understand. And seeing the community response to that.
I was about to say that I think that the most interesting thing I saw is the questions coming in and the interaction, and I think that because this is the reason we're doing it, really.
Absolutely, yeah.
We do not really gain anything else apart from having fun.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time and
it's a lot of work. It's my
effort.
baby, so it's a lot of my work.
Yeah. There is a lot of effort, and I think we're doing it for the people.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
by people, I mean you.
You guys, for the community. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So knowing that the community at least likes it and they're interested into it, it's important for me, and it means that we should try to continue doing it.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I hope you do believe so, and if you don't, please do let us know, because as I said, it's a lot of work that we can be doing something else, if not that.
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, if you have been enjoying these streams, and again, you can catch the streams on the YouTube channel. I did link the playlist for those already, and we can link it again at the end of the stream. Please do let us know, because again, like, if you're not enjoying them, we won't do them, and if you are enjoying them, we really need to know so that we can keep doing them. That's really the difference. Like, we're doing this all for you. We want to make sure that you're enjoying it. That's all that's going on. We have time for just a couple more questions. What would you call, like in Dragon Age, the quartering and isolation of mages? Well, that's segregation. That's
more
cultural
like a
segregation.
witch hunt, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this happens through time and time again in all societies for all sorts of reasons. Effectively, the phenomenon you see there is a class of people that have the potential to become very powerful, but they are not either. They don't even either have a centralized means of organizing, or they don't have the means to overthrow the local issues they have.
Yeah.
That effectively flips the coin around and makes them hunted.
Yeah.
It is very common.
It's a very common trope.
It's
Yeah.
a very common.
TVC's the BBC series Merlin did this very nicely, I thought.
Yeah, but that's I'm talking about wizards. I'm talking generally in life.
Okay,
it's
sure.
quite common to see something like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, marginalization is a huge problem.
Marginalization is the easiest part of that.
Right.
I think marginalization added to that to be hunted and to be effectively genocides. We've seen so
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
I'll give you an example, and I know it's a low blow, but it's true. Germany, 1930s, Hebrews.
Yeah.
If they had a lot of power,
Yeah.
and they had a lot of money, and they knew that, they could actually take...
And they were traditionally already a marginalized group.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is an example of people that found a part of the society which was not very well organized in order to defend itself.
Yeah.
And they managed to do essentially
Yeah, and they did a literal witch hunt.
In my city, in my home city,
That's Thessaloniki
in Greece, in 1930, we had about 70% Hebrew population.
Jewish population.
Well, they were Hebrew as well. In 1945, the new census that happened found out we had 5%.
Yeah, and that is a common story all over Europe. Yeah.
And what you should know is that Thessaloniki was a merchant city.
Yeah.
It was filled with Jewish merchants that were very good people. I know because my grandparents went to school with them and they knew them very well. And they were the rich people and they were very benevolent people as well. But they were people who hold the money and hold all the power in the city.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why when the essentially occupation happened, they were just moved away.
Yeah, because Thessaloniki was occupied, wasn't it, by the...
Yeah, of course. For 4 years.
Yeah, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
So that is your answer. I think we just have time for another question. What is the most interesting social dynamic you guys have encountered? This is from Bladed Shadows.
The most interesting
social dynamic. So within a fictional genre, what's the most interesting social dynamic that somebody has leveraged? What can you think of? I mean, for me, it's all about what creates conflict. Because I'm a writer, all right. So for me, I'm always thinking about plot. I'm always thinking about conflict. I'm always thinking about where do the problems come from. So anything that stymies somebody, anything that restricts somebody, to me is interesting. Obviously, in the real world, it's a bad thing. In a fictional world, it is interesting because it's an opportunity for a character to overcome, and it creates pressure. Either pressure that is formative for the character and then creates later trauma that they have to get over, because characters with trauma are interesting characters. People with trauma need help. Characters with trauma are interesting. Or it creates a present problem that becomes part of the plot of the story.
I think that from my side, and that's a very generic answer, I know it's not the best answer you would expecting, but specifically in fantasy, if you talk about fantasy as a genre, the fact that gods exist, walk the earth, and you can physically see their manifestation in everyday life, it's a social dynamic that we don't think about what the repercussions would be. We're not talking about faith anymore. And that is something extremely important that people don't realize. In fantasy settings, there is no such a thing as faith.
No, it's more ideology and fact.
It's fact, exactly. You believe, you don't have to believe, you know there is a god there. You know there are actually possibly multiple gods.
Yeah.
And you pledge allegiance to an all-powerful being that you expect, if you follow their dogma, to have some benefits to it, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It is a simple. It is a very transactional thing that people don't think of.
It's more like paying ideological taxes than it is like real belief.
Yes, it's not real belief because it's not a matter of I believe for something unrealistic and not happening. If somebody can touch you and heal you because they pray to their god and they did it, you don't have to question yourself if the god exists. You might question if you like this god.
Right, and as I say, it's ideological taxes.
Exactly.
Then it's who do you give your
allegiance
to? Exactly. In fact, in such a world, and again, I'm a massive Terry Pratchett fan, and Terry Pratchett put it very well. Atheism is a one-way route to suicide because saying gods don't exist when they do exist is a one-way ticket to getting chopped.
Yeah, it's like saying society doesn't exist, other people don't exist. I mean, at some point you'll either end up dead or alone.
I mean, to be fair, flat earthers, but also. Like, some people, whatever evidence they get...
You can say that flat earthers, if they haven't gone to space and saw the world from above, they can still say, I believe it does not exist.
But if somebody walks around in a traditional D&D setting, they haven't seen the avatar of a god. They might see the manifestation of divine magic, but they also see arcane magic. So, for them, a layman, not a specialist, that's just foo-foo lights. Magical foo-foo lights that some people can do that they don't understand.
Fair point, but yeah, fair point.
Do you see what I mean? Like, I totally agree, but there is the flat earther argument for that.
Yeah, of course.
Where people would be like, I don't believe in God because I haven't licked one. Or poked one, or whatever.
That's how I perceive the world.
Yeah? If you haven't poked it.
Poke it and lick it, yeah. If I don't know how it tastes like or it smells like, it doesn't exist.
Must be said, I got in lots of trouble with Dimitri at one point because I asked him what happened in his world if you licked a god. And he told me that I wasn't taking it seriously enough.
It's true.
It was a genuine question. It was, based on some information that I think I'm not allowed to reveal about the mechanics of Hydrea. But it was a genuine question, and apparently it wasn't serious enough. So this is me being serious now. We would like to thank you all for being here. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you everyone who's listened throughout the month, in fact, because, you know, we've done a lot of chat here. We've done a lot of talking, and you guys have been with us. You've been asking us super interesting questions, and that's really what it's all about. Asking questions, getting the conversation going, talking about these aspects so that we can be better world builders. Indeed. And so that we can look in more detail at them and get inspiration from them.
Can I make a plug now?
Please.
I have a website called worldbuilding.com, www.worldbuilding.com. You should go and see it. It's about world building and things. I hope you enjoyed it, and I would like to get your feedback on that. Yes.
I'll drink to that. All right, you beautiful beans. Just before we go, the obligatory Maze Arcana shout out. I just want to say that they're awesome and you should check them out. I know we've been talking about them a lot, so you probably know about them already, but you can check them out. They're on YouTube. You can find them. They're awesome. Check them out. So, without further ado, hopefully I will see you in the Discord, and otherwise you will go and do some raiding. I would like you to grab your hammer.
And go build.
Nice. Where is it? Mouse is gone to sleep.
Click it.